Welcome to the Prepared School Psych Podcast, your resource for student success. I'm Jenny Ponzurek, your host and guide, drawing from over 2 decades of experience as a school psychologist, presenter, and consultant. Join me as we explore practical strategies and insights from educational experts. From evidence-based approaches to real-world challenges, we are here to support you. Whether you're a school psychologist seeking new tools, a teacher in search of effective strategies, or a special education director eager to support your team, this podcast is here to provide you with the resources you need. And as we journey together, I have a special offer just for you, our dedicated listeners. Get exclusive access to a free 2-week trial of the Prepared School Psych community. Experience on-demand resources, mini courses where you can earn CEUs, and access to me and my content specialist through a variety of methods to answer your questions. Head over to jennyponzurek.com/podcast now and use the code podcast at checkout. That's podcast, all caps, for your 2-week trial. Information about this free offer can also be found in the show notes. Come and be a part of our supportive community. We would love to have you. Now, tune in and get prepared. Welcome to the Prepared School Psych Podcast. Welcome, everyone. This is Jenny Ponzurek with another episode. And today's episode, our topic today is all about imposter syndrome. So this is such an important topic for those of you who are newer to the field, but probably also a really important topic for those of you who are also veterans in this field. I want to thank the listener who reached out and asked for me to do an episode about this topic. And this was very timely because actually it was about a month ago that one of our school psych programs actually asked me to come and talk about this topic with a group of students. So I am so excited to share some of the thoughts that I had shared with those students with all of you today. When we think of the term imposter syndrome, a lot of times one of the first words we think about is the word fraud, right? Why do we all feel like frauds in our job, and what can we do about this? So that's what we're going to chat about today. Now, for those of you in your early career, students newer to the field, brand new, just graduated, a lot of our imposter syndrome really comes from this feeling like you have no idea what you're doing. For some of you, and this was definitely me when I was still in my very early 20s. And I actually got some feedback from people who would ask me in meetings, are you actually old enough to do this? So it wasn't that I was always feeling this, other people also threw that at me. And I kept reassuring everyone, no, they gave me this credential. I am old enough to be doing this. So a lot of times early on in our career, we get a lot of this. And why is that? Because everything's new. We just went to grad school. We have all of this learning. But for a lot of us, we go into our schools and we're like, I didn't learn about this, or this. And as I was thinking about this topic yesterday, as I was preparing to do this episode, one of the things that I was thinking about was a lot of times, at least for me, imposter syndrome comes up a lot when I'm going outside of my comfort zone. Many of you know I've been in this field for approaching 25 years that I've been in this field. And so a lot of those things that would cause that imposter syndrome to show up for me early on in my career, those aren't the same things that trigger it today. But because, like most of you, we are constantly learning, we are constantly growing. For me, I have been doing trainings a lot for the last couple of years, and there are certain topics that I feel super comfortable and confident with. And I am ready for questions if someone's questioning why I'm talking about something or how do I know that. I've been talking about it for so many years that I don't have as much feeling like a fraud on some of these topics here. But I will say, just in this last year, I've had some school districts that I've worked with for a number of times who have reached out and asked me to talk about a topic that is not one of my typical ones. It's not just in my wheelhouse that I could wake up in the middle of the night and talk about this, right? Some of you know, you could wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and ask me about questions about dyslexia. I am probably able to answer that at 3 a.m. But some of the other topics have really been a stretch for me. And it's been a great stretch that I said yes to. But definitely when I walk into some of those trainings, sometimes I have a little bit of that feeling that's trickling back up again. And that's because I'm going outside of my comfort zone, right? So again, when I think back around early in my career, I felt like a fraud a lot. Everything was new. And for some of you who know me from a lot of trainings, this might surprise you, but early on in my school psych career, even something as little as standing up in front of my cohort members, doing my, presentation in class, I would turn bright red. I always loved it when someone would point it out, like, are you okay? And because you could see it like creeping up from my neck onto my face. I just was so worried that someone would ask me a question that I wasn't ready for. And that followed me into many an IEP meetings. And I sometimes would get so focused on this idea that everyone was listening to me. And that everyone was just wondering, like, what am I going to say next? And if I started thinking about that too much, I'm like, what am I talking about? And that's where some of that bright red in my face would come back around there because I wasn't quite 100% sure about what I was talking about. Our university programs do a great job preparing us. I had amazing supervisors during my practicum and internship years, but still you come across situations that you've never been in before. Hey everyone, just a quick minute of your time to tell you about something coming up. Summer Boot Camp 2024 has been scheduled, and we are looking forward to seeing you virtually from July 8th through the 19th. If you are new to Summer Boot Camp, it is 2 weeks of professional development with some Q&A sessions to help answer all of your lingering questions. Whether you're starting your internship this fall, your first year in this field, or your 20th year, we have sessions for you. This summer, I am unveiling my IEP report card, a way for you to self-reflect and determine what is working and what areas are in need of some growth. We have resources all over the IEP report card, and to help you with those areas in need of growth, we have 12, yes, 12 professional development sessions over 2 weeks. Now, if you can't make the sessions live because you're actually going to enjoy your summer, no worries as we record everything. If you need some CEUs or a certificate of completion, we have those too. So head over to my website at jennyponzerk.com today, or click on the link in the show notes to learn all about the sessions we are offering. I will see you in July. So to this day, when I'm taking on new topics for trainings, I might feel a little bit of imposter syndrome. There are certain topics in our field that every couple of years I have that moment of, are we doing this right? Am I doing this right? Many of you know that I will help out and do some overflow assessments or take on some specialized assessments sometimes for school districts. And so there's definitely times I'm sitting in an IEP meeting and I'm still like, are we doing this right? Right? Are we getting sued for something that we're doing here? A lot of different thoughts creeping into my brain 25 years in, but they're definitely different thoughts than 25 years ago. Now, one of the other things I like to acknowledge as well is that different people in our world can kind of cause a different, maybe intensity of imposter syndrome. So it could be that, my team really trusts me, but oh my goodness, I might not feel comfortable asking a question in front of all of my colleagues because these are people who know what I'm supposed to know. Or maybe you feel one way talking one-on-one with your principal, but oh my gosh, they asked you to go do a training for your school staff. And so some of these things might be coming up differently depending on who you are talking to. There's a reason why there's this anonymous way we can post in school psych Facebook groups, right? Because some of us have that imposter syndrome. Yes, some of us are posting things that we just don't want our actual colleagues to know it's us. But sometimes we're posting things because we're like, I just don't want you to know that I'm not quite sure of this answer. But with this field of school psychology, which is an amazing, amazing field, there's just way too much to know. And things are often changing in our field. And many people think that we have all the answers. It's this wonderful feeling sometimes that so many people think that you have all of this knowledge, and principals will ask you interesting questions, and parents ask you interesting questions. But then sometimes we feel like we're supposed to have all of the answers. And that's where a lot of this comes from. Thinking that we're supposed to, whether we're in year 1, year 5, or year 25, that we're supposed to have all the answers. Absolutely not. This field is too wide in order for us to have all of the answers. But I think what's really important in our field is not always knowing what the answer is, but how to find the answer. And I think that's something that's comforting for me. And that was something early on in my career. And again, this took me a couple years. This was not year 1, where I realized that I might not know all of the answers in this meeting, but I might be able to rely on someone else at that meeting because I felt like I was on really good teams, or I would come up with those phrases that would just let me have some time to go figure out that answer. I realize that I might not know the answer, but I know how to find out the answer. I have problem solving skills, and that's going to be such an important piece here. So, when we talk about imposter syndrome, I'm going to talk about it in kind of 3 different points. Number 1, I think we need to acknowledge that it just exists. Number 2, we need to create some sort of plan for this. And number 3, we got to figure out who our people are. Who's going to help us when we're in these different moments here? So let's talk about this first one, acknowledge. For most of us, at some point in our career or at every point in our career, we're going to have some imposter syndrome, but it's sitting there right next to all the different parts of ourselves, including the best version of ourselves, right? That best version of yourself or your ideal version of you, this is like you on your best day. You're thinking all the positive thoughts. Everything's going your way. No one's bothering you with unnecessary things. You're getting through that to-do list. You're having a great day. And sometimes I think about like, what could I accomplish if I was able to live like that for 30 days in a row or 365 days in a row? Why can't I just walk in with this amazing mindset every single day? And the reason why we can't is our brains are sometimes working against us. Our brains are actually constantly checking to see if we're in danger. They're kind of messing with us sometimes, right? Our brains are like, you can't live like that every day, Jenny. We can't just be thinking all of this wonderful thoughts. Why? Because our brain is constantly wondering, is she in danger? My brain is constantly looking at what emotions I'm feeling. And it's like, oh, let's process that emotion before we can think critically. And I'm like, I don't have time for processing my nervousness and anxiety to speak in an IEP meeting, right? It's hard because our brains are built to protect us, but sometimes I feel like it's working against me as well. So, one of the things I think it's helpful to acknowledge is just we have this imposter syndrome. Some days it's hanging out with us all day long. Some days it is just popping up here and there. Sometimes I'm not going to see it, but then something is going to come up, right? Because most of us in this field don't just stay in our comfort zone. We're constantly wondering, how can I help the students more? Is there another class I could take? Is there something else I'd like to bring to this school site? Is there another committee meeting I could possibly be a part of, not because we're not busy, it's just because we want to help. So many of us have so many different ideas of how we want to help. So, one of the things that I think is going to be helpful is to acknowledge that it's going to pop up for us. And what I think can be really helpful is to acknowledge when it is popping up and what's the circumstances here. Again, if you're listening to this and you're in your first year, you're like every day, all day, it pops up. Yeah, it might, and that's okay. Notice that. But then maybe take a look at the end of your second year, and hopefully you've realized, wow, it didn't show up every single day, all day long, right? I'm feeling a lot more confident over here. And those of you who've been in the field for a while who don't get this all the time, we definitely notice when it does show up because it's not an everyday thing. And so for myself, when this is showing up, I'm always like, what's going on? What's the situation? So that I can acknowledge that and then come up with a plan for what's going on here. Because I'm never going to know everything about this field. I am never going to know how to answer every question, meaning I don't know the answer to every single question, but I can come up with a plan of how I'm going to react. That is comforting for me. That is comforting for me that I have a plan. Okay. So many of us have some of those go-to comments or go-to responses when something interesting comes up. So this is one of my favorite ones. I don't know the answer right now, but I can do some research and get back to you. I most recently used this in an IEP meeting. We had an 80, 90 page report that we were going to go through as a team. There was an outside evaluator who was going through their results, and the outside evaluator asked me a question that I had never been asked before. And this was the question. I notice you use the same adaptive rating scale that I used. That's what he was asking me. He noticed I used the same one that he had used. And he goes, are we allowed to give that so close in time? Now, many of us know off the top of our head how close in time we're allowed to give something like the C-top or the Wyatt. But an adaptive rating scale, no one's ever asked me that question. I've never looked that up. That was not something off the top of my head. And even if it was, I was in like a really high stress situation. And my brain probably couldn't locate that answer, even if it was inside my brain. So I said, I don't know that answer right now, but I can do some research and get back to you. And you know what I found out? Yeah, there's no like time limit. It's an adaptive rating scale. There's no practice effect on an adaptive rating scale. That was my first thought in the meeting. But again, I wasn't 100% certain. What if there was some magical part of the manual that I just wasn't bringing forth into my brain right there? Sometimes we have parents or teachers who say the most interesting things to us that sometimes we're like, I don't think that has anything to do with our topic of conversation right now. I have definitely been in meetings where someone shares something with me that I am just like, wow, is there like a camera in the room? Like, what is going on here? There's just some interesting things that have been shared with me. So this is one of my responses I have used more than once. I have not read any research on that specifically, where people just throw in random stuff. I've not read any research on that specifically, but I'd love to focus back on how we can help support Johnny in math. Like, can we focus back on our conversation here, right? Sometimes we've been in meetings that did not go the way we planned. Sometimes we know exactly why it didn't go well. Sometimes it might not have been us. It might have been some other people sitting around the table and we don't want to point fingers. So I have some go-to for those kind of situations as well. That meeting didn't go the way I think it was going to go. Does everyone have any feedback on what we could have done differently? Maybe not 5 minutes after that meeting, maybe the next day after that meeting. So a lot of us have those go-to responses. And if you have some of those, but you can never remember them in the moment, I love that so much of our world is online now, whether we're having a Zoom meeting or we're just bringing our laptops with us during meetings. Oh my goodness, put a Post-it note somewhere, right? Put that up for you so you get to see that if you're having difficulties remembering those kind of go-to responses for yourself. So one of the things for me is I have a plan of how I'm going to react in that moment. If someone's going to ask me a question I don't know the answer to, I have a set response for that. And I feel really good about it. And I will follow up with them. But the second thing in that reflection then too, and in my plan could also be where am I getting this imposter syndrome? Do I have a lack of content knowledge? Sometimes other people walk into our meetings and they are experts in certain parts of our field that maybe you don't have as much expertise in. And you're like, all right, they kept saying this term over and over again. I just nodded my head to look like I knew what they were talking about, but I was totally taking notes. Do you need to go look that up? Do you need to go bring up that question in your next job alike meeting with your fellow colleagues? Hey, did anyone else hear of this most interesting thing? Maybe there's a training you need to sign up for. Maybe it's something that isn't this one off, but many people over and over again are kind of bringing something up, and you're like, I don't have as much content knowledge in this area as I'd like. I'd love to go to a training on this. So there are a lot of different aspects of our fields, and there are definitely instances where I'm like, even in my interviewing for this podcast, there's so many different things that the people I'm interviewing bring up in our conversation that I'm just thinking, wow, I would love to get more into that. And then I got to figure out how important is that to me right now? Is that something that I really am very passionate about right now? Is this something that I think would really, really help me in like the next month of my life? Or is this just one of those things I'm going to add to my list of, in case you're ever bored, let's go ahead and look at some of these topics here. I think the other thing that I hear a lot also from newer school psychologists in our field is someone questioning your conclusions of an evaluation. And so they are wondering, maybe they're completely disagreeing with your conclusion. You said the kid's eligible, and they're like, I don't think that you got that right. Or, of course, when we say a child does not appear to meet eligibility, a lot of people question that, right? And I think one of the helpful pieces for me, again, like, what do I go back to? I never make decisions. We never come to a conclusion as a team based on that one test score, that one thing one person said. All of our decisions are typically grounded in multiple sources of data. So that if someone is questioning something, it isn't that I interpreted that one thing maybe differently than someone else did. We're always looking at how much do all of our different data sources really align or converge, right? So I think that can be a helpful piece as well when someone's questioning something and then our imposter syndrome's coming up and we're like, did I interpret this correctly? Remember that even though I might be leading the discussion about eligibility, most of the time we've talked about it as a school-based team. And if somebody had a completely different thought than what I was thinking, I'm hoping they would have brought that up ahead of time or feel comfortable enough to bring it up during the meeting. That this is usually not just me looking at one piece of data. This is so much data that we are looking at. So when someone questions me and my conclusions, I can go through and be like, well, I wasn't just looking at this one test score. It was also this, this, and this. Are you noticing something, or is there something that you know about that we haven't shared yet that would change my mind? So I also have that as one of my go-tos. Is there any other data that I don't have access to right now that would help with this conversation here? Lots of different ways to kind of take this. So number one, I think we need to acknowledge imposter syndrome just is going to exist. For some of us, it's going to exist every day, all day. For some of us, it just pops up sometimes. We want to pay attention about what is causing the most imposter syndrome. And then we want to come up with some sort of plan. What's our plan for reaction? What is our plan to notice and maybe keep track of things that maybe I need to spend a little bit of time Googling something or posting something on a school psych Facebook group going, does anyone else have any upcoming trainings that are going to talk about this topic? We need some sort of plan to figure out, like, how are we going to address this so that we're not in this constant feeling of imposter syndrome? So number one, acknowledge. Number two, have some sort of plan. And then number three, we've really got to have our people. you really need to figure out who are these people that you're going to reach out to when you do need some support. And who could those people be? Well, if you're still in school or recently graduated, you probably have some favorite cohort members, right? There are some lifelong friendships that grow from being in the most interesting couple of years in your life together. There's still some people today, 25 years later, that I communicate with and are my favorite cohort members. We typically have some of our favorite go-to staff at our school that we can also go and talk to about some of these different things. And then I think it's also great to have some people outside of the educational field or outside of work that can also help support us too, because it's really going to be dependent on what it is you're looking for. For sometimes, if I just want to share, like, oh my goodness, you'll never guess what happened to me today. You'll never guess what so and so said. And I had no idea how to respond. I don't need a school psych to be listening to that conversation. It could be great, but I don't need that in that situation. I just need anyone who's ever been in a similar situation where someone asked a question and you weren't ready or didn't know how to respond. Sometimes I just need to vent and I want someone to just be like, wow, that was rough, right? How did you deal with that? And sometimes you're like, actually, I was hoping that we could figure out how to solve this situation. In that kind of case, maybe I do need someone with a similar background as me, or maybe I need someone who maybe I need to go talk to like a site leader around the situation here. Maybe I don't need school psychology, but I do need someone who has some information that could be helpful, just understanding the culture at this school that could help me better. So really, again, this is going to go back to that acknowledging piece. What about this situation is causing that imposter syndrome? Were we just caught off guard? Or is it that content knowledge? And we really need to figure out who can I talk to about this situation here so that I can feel a little bit better. And it might be that first I just need to vent and I could find anyone on the street to vent to. And then maybe it's, you know what, I really do want to learn a little bit more about this topic. And so maybe I do need to reach out to someone who might have some content knowledge about this area here. I think it's helpful for us to acknowledge that imposter syndrome is likely going to show up some part of our world. For some of us, a little bit more than we'd like. But if all we do is stay inside our comfort zone, if all we do is decide not to put ourselves out there and to avoid any of those situations. If you're so concerned a teacher's going to call you out on something because you yourself have never been a teacher before and you just hide away in your office and close the door, I like to think about if we're hiding away, constantly afraid that someone's going to figure out you don't know all the answers, your school's really going to miss out. Because you might not have all of those answers, but you got into this field because you do have this very big passion about helping students and helping families. And I can go figure out that answer. I don't want to just be constantly in this fear of someone figuring it out that I don't know the answer to every question. I want to have a plan, and then I want to really focus on how I can help support these students, which is why most of us got into this field, right? To be able to really help support the students and their families. I hope this was helpful for everyone who is still listening. I really want to thank again the listener who asked me to talk about this topic. And I want to remind anyone listening, if you have any specific topics that you would like for me to talk about, find someone to interview, maybe you've listened to a previous episode and you have some follow-up questions, or you were hoping we would dive deeper into a certain area, head over to my website, jennyponzeric.com/podcast, and there's a space right there. I always say this during trainings, but your time is so valuable. And I want to make sure that I am using your time that you are spending with me, whether it's in a training or listening to a podcast episode, as I want you to use your time as efficiently and as valuably as possible. So if there is something that you would really love for me to delve into, I would love to do that for you. All right. feel free, head over to my website. There's a place right there on the podcast page to throw out some ideas, and we'll do that for you. All right, everyone. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you later. That concludes another episode of the Prepared School Psych podcast. And I hope today's discussion equipped you not just with knowledge, but also the confidence to take action. Remember, every conversation we have and every resource we share builds a bridge towards a more inclusive and empowering learning landscape for our students. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more insightful conversations and resources to support your journey. Share this podcast with colleagues. We would love it if you would also rate and review the podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Just a reminder, everyone, the information and advice provided in this podcast are for guidance purposes only, and all listeners are required to follow both federal and state law and their own school district guidelines and policies. Thank you.